Ahoy friends, welcome to Building the Alpha Dory. I'm Dan, and today we're going to be out in the shop again, cleaning up some of those half flap joints, and hopefully we'll get a couple more frames glued up. Anyway, thanks for stopping in, and let's get out into the shop and get to it. Yeah, so this cleaning up the half flaps can sometimes be a bit of a tedious process. You just kind of gotta do it. Put your hands on autopilot and just let your mind wander. It's a pretty simple task. It's just gotta get done. Thankfully, not everything about Dory building is a real head scratcher trying to figure out what's going on. There's some things where you can just kind of get into the work and get into the groove and just do it. Get her done, so, as they say. Yeah, the way these laps sort of lay out the frames is pretty sweet. The one of the sort of signatures of the Alpha Dory is just how flat her frames lay out, which makes for a boat with a narrow bottom but a fairly wide hull and a stable hull at speed. And this was kind of a trend that was just starting to take off in racing dories and racing boats at the time. So it's kind of a interesting transition period between old-time traditional craft and the new modern design concepts that were coming in. It's really part of what makes this boat such a beauty. The lines of it are just so sweet. The way the frames lay out and sort of impart a curvature to the run of the laps, especially at the first and second knuckles there. And then the way the planks taper to meet the stem and stern, you'll see, is due in large part to the angle of those laps and those knuckles. And that's what gives her really super sweet planking lines. There's all these number of modern lapstrake designs out there, whether they be glued plywood or whatever, they just don't have the beauty of the plank runs of these, especially the Alpha Dory. Just the way those planks are shaped. They got curvature, sure, they're on the boat, they're on a rounded surface, but the Alpha Dory has real shape to each plank. It's really narrow up in the bow and tapers to the stern and wide in the middle, or there's a couple planks that are almost straight runs and then a couple that taper off to almost nothing. So there's a lot of just a lot of interesting lines that get created by the way those planks sort of rise and fall or grow and shrink, as they run along the length of the boat. I just haven't seen that sort of thing in many of the modern designs. Of course, part of that is trying to, the shapes those planks make is a big part of it is trying to get a 10-inch board, 10 or 12-inch board to work on the length of the boat. These days you got a sheet of plywood. It's 8 feet long and 4 feet wide, so you can cut basically any shaped plank you want out of a piece of plywood. You can cut an S curve. You got 4 feet to deal with. Of course you don't want to waste plywood, but with a grown plank, timber, a board from a tree, you've only got a certain amount of width to play with. So you've got to use the curvature of the boat and then the tapering and the widening of that plank to fit it onto the boat and make the shape of a boat out of it. So it's a little bit more finesse and development into it than you'd initially think, and it's much like anything. If you're not really into it and you don't know a whole lot about it, then they all kind of look the same. I guess it's got to be something like with a fine wine or whatever. I'm not a wine connoisseur, but there are people out there who can really tell the difference between a $20 bottle and a $200 bottle because they know about it. It's the same sort of thing when you know about a boat. You know about Dory's, you can tell the difference between them. One of the things that I think people kind of get hung up on, when they go to build their own boat, so they'll get all caught up in getting everything perfect, and spending so much time on it that when they make a mistake, they really take it to heart, and it's a big waste of time. The best way is to just get started and start making mistakes and then figure out how to fix them, really. And one of the parts of getting good at building a boat is minimizing the mistakes and knowing what mistakes are going to matter. When you got to remake something, and when is it not a big deal? And the building method plays a large part in that. Like when I was cutting out cutting the half laps in the frames the other day, I cut the half laps of the number 2 and 3 frames, cut the angle of the half lap into the number 4 frame as well, which meant that when I recut the number 4 frame to the proper angle, I lost about a ½ inch of height on the frame. Now, you know, if I was all twisted out of shape about it, you know, who knows, maybe I would have tried to drag out another piece of wood or whatever and cut another frame, waste some more wood. But, you know, knowing that I'd made those frames bigger than they were going to end up anyway, and knowing that, and also knowing the method of the boat building that we're using, which is we're letting the planks dictate the shape of the frames. We're not making frames that are going to be like a finished product as soon as we get them on the boat. We can't touch them again. No, that's not what we're doing. We're making frames that have a little extra wood on them so we can cut them and tweak them to be perfect once we lay the planking on it, which is, you'll see what we're going to do. And it's a very old method of building, and you're basically letting the fair curve of the plank, the fair run of the line of the planking dictate the shape of the frames, rather than making a frame that has the knuckles, you know, the joints between planks. So that's, you know, the angles between laps, rather than making a set of frames that has all those knuckles pre-cut into it, and then trying to tweak the planks and get them to land on the knuckles. What we're doing is putting in slightly oversized frames, and then as we lay the planks on, we're cutting those knuckles as we go. So each knuckle is going to be right in the place that the nice straight fair plank tells us it needs to go, rather than putting the knuckles in and then trying to tweak and twist and cut the planks in wonky ways to meet the knuckles that we've already put in the boat. That's the way to get an unfair run of planking, is to, you know, predetermine where you think the knuckles should go, rather than letting the plank act like a fairing batten and show you where the knuckles should go. That's looking pretty good. I think that's all of the half flaps that we need to do. Get this little, I think that's the last of the nope. Two more there we go, two more. Frame ends, two more of the arms. These are the number 1 frames, so we're on the last frame, the bow frame. We want to make sure that this is an especially sturdy joint, only because the bow frame takes a lot of the load from the rig. The mast is right up there, and the stays are either side of that bow frame, so you get the mast pushing down and the stays pulling up, trying to collapse that frame. Some people claim that some of the older boats had special cross members put in there to kind of reinforce their bow frames, like tie rods and whatnot. We'll see, maybe we'll put a little extra bracing in there. we're definitely going to have definitely going to have some gorgeous little hanging knees, and we'll probably double them up on the bow seat. Really super reinforce it up there, and then we'll have hanging knees on the rest of the seats as well. Knee those thwarts right into the rail. The rail's one of the strongest parts of the boat, and it's not like a Banks Dory where the seats are removable. You can take the seats out and stack one boat inside another boat. In the Alpha, the seats are a structural number, so they get permanently kneed and nailed. Looking forward to take you guys back to Burnham's when Harold or John, we'll see who ends up making the sails once they get started. I'll bring you guys back to the sail loft and let you have a look around. Alright, so that I guess is the last of the half laps. Alright, so let's get to gluing up some more of these frames. So yeah, it really is second verse, same as the first type of deal. Got my Type Bond 3, which really is wonderful stuff to work with. It actually glues oak just as well as any sort of epoxy you're going to get your hands on. Some reason the epoxy doesn't really like to penetrate the oak, doesn't like to sink into it. But you know, oak will take up water, and the Type Bond is water based, so seems to do pretty well with the oak. I've had good results on a number of frame sets that I've made. When I was building Centennial, I actually tested a couple of these joints before I riveted them. Tested them to the point of failure, and the actual wood was breaking before the glue joint was. So I thought that was a pretty good endorsement of the glue. So yeah, just make sure you get enough on all the surfaces. And this glue likes tight joints. It's not as notorious as, like, say, Resorcinol, which needs basically an airtight joint. You need to be able to clamp all the glue out of the joint, otherwise the Resorcinol isn't gonna really hold. You need to be able to put a lot of pressure on it. This glue is, the Type Bond 3 is far more forgiving of, you know, tiny inconsistencies in the wood. Now you definitely do want a nice tight joint. You want to be clamping glue out, but you don't have to clamp it so crazy tight as that as the Resorcinol stuff. And I mean, some people, usually folks who are doing like composite type stuff, you know, they got crazy clamps. Like some of these guys will have, you know, like 100 clamps or something in their boat shop, and they'll have them all lined up on the side of a boat. I've got 8 of these Jorgensen type wood clamps, and then probably maybe almost a dozen iron, typical iron C-clamp type C-clamps. I hardly ever use all of those. We're going to use most of the Jorgensens on this evening on the frame clamped up. Just to get everything nice and tight. Looking good, squeezing some glue out onto the floor there, so that's a good sign. So these are the half frames that are going to be at the center board, which is why they're so small and easy to handle. Oh yeah, and if you think you're going to get glue on your wood clamps, you can always hit them with a quick coat of linseed oil or whatever, and that'll work wonders to keep them from sticking to your work, especially with the tight bond, because the tight bond's water based. So if you get some oil on your workpiece, it's not a good thing. But if you get some oil on your wood clamp, the tight bond's not going to stick to the oil. Alright, so here's the other half frame, port side. So we'll glue this one up next. And yeah. Yeah, the other nice thing with the Type Bond 3 is it's fairly inert, and it's not putting off gassing a whole lot of chemicals. Also, it's not something that you'll get as far as I know, it's not something you'll get allergic to or sensitized to. I mean, unless you're allergic to water or something like that. Not a good thing. Don't even know how that would work, but yeah, so it's fairly benign chemicals in it. I mean, I wouldn't eat it or anything, but it's nice and easy to work with. Let me hit this with get that little edge along the half flap with the chisel again. But yeah, it's water cleanup, and if it is off gassing anything, it's mostly just water evaporating out of the glue. That's how it dries, is it off gases water vapor or whatever. And yeah, so it's fairly benign compound, as opposed to say epoxy resin or whatever, which epoxy doesn't reek like polyester fiberglass resin, but it does still off gas quite a bit of chemicals. And if it's something you can avoid, so much the better. Who knows what the long-term effects of that stuff are going to be, but Can't imagine it would be a good thing. A little piece of shaving just fell in there. Yeah. Gosh. So when I'm tapping that, I'm actually tapping the frames together, tightening that joint. There we go. A lot of glue coming out of there now. It's got it nice and tight. Alright, so those are the two. So we got both of the half frames, number 2 frame glued up. So we got both sections of the number 2 here. That's great. And then, so we got the number 3 frame here. I glued this up one arm in the last video and then the other arm this morning before I headed off to work. So there's that. And then, yeah, so I've got this number 1 frame left to glue, and like I was saying, what I'll do is I'll glue one arm tonight, clamp that all up and let it dry overnight, and then I'll glue the other arm. I just don't like the idea of clamping it up while it's wet and then trying to glue the other one on as well, because you don't want to disturb that glue joint, the first glue joint that you made, while the glue is still wet. You know, you want to give that time to really dry up in the proper position and harden before you go messing with it. Thanks for joining me for building the Alpha Dory. And next video we're hoping to finish up gluing the rest of the frame arms and maybe get to bandsawing the glued ones, cleaning those up, and who knows, possibly even start nailing them down. We'll see what happens. Anyway, have a great afternoon, and see you next time.